Good morning,
Good
Mr.
morning.
Pullen. Appreciate your time joining us to help our students at the University of West Georgia in their learning about finance. And if you don't mind, could you share your name and title and kind of your background that's led you to your current position?
Sure. Well, my name is Alan Pullen, and I'm starting my 14th year as Director of Finance at Bremen City Schools. Um, Before that, I was worked for 2 years at the University of West Georgia in the Internal Audit Department, and I received my undergraduate in accounting and master's in accounting from the University of West Georgia as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Pullen. And I do want to bring up, just because I know it well, I know this isn't directly related to QBE and allotment sheets, but now under your supervision, and of course others, you guys have won the Excellence in Financial Reporting with the Department of Audits for how many years in a row?
Yes, we're 11 years running now, so
Yeah.
that's something that's to be celebrated across our entire district.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for students to understand the importance of good financial accounting. And obviously, we know schools and people can get in trouble in a hurry, not always intentionally with money, but having good financial practices is an important part of that. So I kind of want to just work that in. The time in the class didn't allow for a lot of that, but I just did want to point that out. So, can you kind of just, so when I say an allotment sheet, our audience, a lot of them are probably somewhat familiar. Most of them are assistant principals and principals that may aspire to the central office in some capacity. But can you kind of just tell us, what is an allotment sheet?
Sure. Well, an allotment sheet, the Georgia Department of Education, they title it. You'll hear the term QBE. Allotment sheet, and that stands for Quality Basic Education, and it's a state law and a state funded mechanism that's been in place for many years, but it's really the base funding that the state provides each school district for them to operate. And there's certain sections of the QBE allotment sheet. Primarily, what you want to focus on, though, is the direct instruction earnings. So that's your different categories of students. For example, you'll have like kindergarten, grades 1 through 3, grades 4 through 5, middle school, high school. Those are your basic, what I would call a regular student would fall into those categories. And speaking of basic, that's really your main. It's typically your lower funded categories, with high school being the base funding. So everything starts with a high school student receiving like the minimum funding, and then it builds up. You get a little more funding for kindergarten because it funds. It's the required parapro in each class. So therefore the state's going to give you a little higher funding there. Also in those categories, you have higher funded categories such as special education, gifted, ESOL, alternative education, remedial education. Students that fall in those categories typically earn a higher weight than a regular student, just because it requires more resources to provide an education for students in those areas. So you have your FTE count, and that coincides with the categories. And so you multiply your FTEs times the weighted category of that student, and then you'll get your funding for that particular category. As well as the direct instruction earnings, a QBE allotment sheet also has indirect cost earnings as well, and those are more costs that are outside of a direct classroom instruction to fund the district. So your central administration costs would be included in there. school administration. So that would be your principals, assistant principal would fall under school administration. You have some facility funds. It doesn't cover a lot of facility funds, but you do receive some base funding there. Media centers, your media center funding falls under there. Staff development. Also, you have additional days of instruction. And typically the state will coin that phrase as 20 additional days of instruction, but it's built in to your indirect costs. So you have your direct instruction, your indirect cost, and then you have, and that'll really give you your base QBE formula earnings. And a lot of that is totally driven by FTE counts, which occur in October and March. And the state will use an average of your FTE counts to calculate your QBE formula earnings. And once you have that, then what's additionally on an allotment sheet, in addition to that, is categorical grants. So that's where transportation, I know we haven't talked about transportation, but your transportation dollars will go in the categorical grant category. Also, nursing services. Every district receives funding for nurses. Also, if a district earns, there's a thing called sparsity grants. I know not a lot of systems earn that, but if they do, that would fall in there. Equalization, which is a very important topic, and it affects a lot of districts. And for a district like ours, equalization is a critical component of our state funding. So that those type of grants, like now we have mental health grants. So I know that's a hot topic around the state. So that's kind of a new state funding, and that's for all districts receive mental health grants. Those are in the categorical grants. So you have kind of that category, and then also there's a local 5 mil share on the allotment sheet, and that is money that's withheld at the state level. So it's the equivalent of 5 meals of your district's equalized digest. And the state equalizes a digest every year, and that kind of eliminates any local tax assessor, how they treat the property values in a specific school district. The state equalized digest would kind of eliminate any local decisions. So that way a county or a school system, a city school system, that the tax assessor is undervaluing property or overvaluing property, the state equalizes everything. And so they use that digest that's distributed each year to school systems to calculate the local 5 mil share. And what they're saying is they want each school system to kind of buy in to the state funding mechanism. So they withhold what would be the equivalent of 5 meals that a system should produce, and you don't receive that funding.
Yeah.
I know that was a lot, and that's kind of in a nutshell of what a QBE allotment sheet would look like, and kind of the different categories to look for on there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And you're right. There's some consistencies, obviously, in the way things are funded, but obviously the equalization, because it's a smaller percentage of the school systems, right, that receive equalization, and that scale every year could change. I know the number, but I guess there's a threshold maybe that the state sets.
Yes, there is. So what the state kind of ranks everyone on order, and it's kind of changed over the last several years. So I'm not sure exactly what how far down the list in terms of wealth. Each system is ranked by how they can how much property taxes they can generate based on the components of their digest. Mm-hmm. And also that's multiplied by the amount of students that they have. And so really the less wealthy you are, the more equalization funds that you would receive. And hence the term of why it is called equalization. It's the state's attempt so that districts that draw a large amount of local property taxes, they wouldn't receive equalization typically. And then your school districts that have a smaller tax base to draw property taxes, they'll receive equalization so that the students in each district would have, would be funded on a more equal basis.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, when people hear wealth, and they hear, well, it's based on the wealth, it has nothing to do with the wealth of the families that you serve in your community. Because, I think if you're unfamiliar with the way allotment sheets work in equalization, I think sometimes educators say, well, how, I don't understand that. We have a lot of kids that are high poverty, but we may not receive equalization. So it has nothing to do with the student population and has everything to do with the tax base, correct?
Right, absolutely. And, a lot of times in our district in Bremen City, we typically have a lot of families that are able and have the means to, to pay for one. We have a lot of out of district students. So about 30% of our student population, they choose to pay to go to school here. So that fact alone, when you look at us from the outside, you think Bremen City is a wealthy school district. But in terms of being able to levy taxes by millage rate, a mill here produces a lot less revenue than our systems, surrounding systems,
right,
and the average for the state. So the state will look at us not in terms of individual student wealth, how wealthy, the parents and the families that live here. They look at what that property tax would generate. So we are typically one of the poorest school districts in the state when you talk about equalization, because for instance, you have other systems around us. A mill would produce, $1 million plus, whereas here a mill only produces about $400,000. So it's a significant difference, and that's where the equalization funds come in to play. On a state level, it's interesting. You would think like Gwinnett County, their tax base is huge, but they still receive a lot of equalization dollars because they have more. They have so many students that attend their school. So you have to look at your tax base and also your student enrollment. So
Yeah.
you can have a really wealthy tax base, but if you have a lot more students than the average system, you could still receive equalization money because that tax base is distributed among how many students that you serve.
Yeah. And that makes sense when you realize the details. I think on the surface level, people think, well, that's unfair. But when you plug in all those variables, that's really what you have to look at. But,
Right.
so you mentioned the October and March FTE counts, and obviously school systems want to maximize, serve the students appropriately, of course, first. But also, if you're doing that, you also want to try to accomplish maximizing funds. So are there conversations that happen before the counts or all throughout the year to kind of make sure that's occurring?
Yes, absolutely. We have a system information, a student information system specialist here at the district office level. And each school has registrars, and there's communication that occur throughout the year between those groups. And also you have your school principals and other district leaders. And basically what you want to do is you want to make sure that we are accurately coding our kids based on how we serve them. And that's ensure that you want to identify your students that will qualify for a higher weighted funded category if they could be served in a special education setting, if they could be identified as EIP, early intervention. That's a higher weighted funded category. And a lot of times classroom models use an inclusion method to where you can put a special education teacher and kind of co-taught to really maximize those dollars for students. But really, you want to have a good student information system, and also a lot of districts. I know we do that here. You will practice. You have a practice count internally before your October and March FTE counts, so that you can look and see real time, how your students are going to be coded, and you can anticipate what that will look like in terms of funding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure you would strongly encourage principals to be in conversation with their SIS person.
Yes, that would be a critical component because, at the building level, the principals would know for sure, and the registrars and counselors where those students, where they're actually in class at, how they are being served. Whereas the district level, you're just looking at the overall picture. But the principals, the counselors, the school level personnel play a critical role in ensuring that kids are coded correctly.
Yeah. Well, tell me about, and I know the rule number one that I learned early on is you don't budget a midterm adjustment, even if you know one's coming. Can you kind of go into a little bit more about midterm adjustment and what that means?
Yes. So, and you're correct. The unwritten and sometimes written rule is to never, never budget for that. The state will do a midterm adjustment. Typically, that's you'll get those numbers around late February, March. But what they do is your QBE allotment sheet, your initial allotment sheet, is really based off of the prior year's student count and numbers. And the midterm adjustment is the state's way of taking that October count of the new school year and kind of truing up the funding to match what your system is doing in the current school year. And so I view the midterm adjustment as being a critical funding component of a school district. If you think about kind of compounded interest in that scenario, a midterm adjustment, if you earn one and you're not budgeting for that, that automatically will help you meet your budget and or provide funds in your fund balance so that you can maintain a healthy fund balance going from year to year. But really, if you receive a midterm adjustment, just like I was saying about compounded interest, that's automatically going to carry forward into that future school year as well. So it's kind of a double. It's kind of double funded there temporarily. For instance, if you receive a $500,000 midterm adjustment, that $500,000 is going to translate into the same $500,000 more on your next year's allotment sheet than if you did not get a midterm adjustment.
Yeah.
On the other hand, while there's room for growth on the midterm adjustment, the state also, if you have declining enrollment and at the midterm it's calculated that you should receive less funds than that initial allotment, the state has what's called a midterm hold harmless, and that's where you will not be punished as a school system and lose funds if you have declining enrollment. And so the state will give you those funds to maintain your funding for that school year, and then your declining enrollment would be affected in the next school year. So that's an important piece to know as well, is that when the state calculates midterm adjustments, if you have declining enrollment, the state will not penalize you.
Yeah, which, that is helpful, because you obviously, if you would had to reduce staff, this is kind of an extreme example, but if they took it away from you mid-year, you've committed to staff for the year, that'd be very difficult. But for that next year, you would have to account for that. And that's a pretty dramatic example, but I think that's a great point, because we know that a lot of enrollments are shrinking, in schools. So getting a midterm adjustment is getting more rare. I know there's some systems growing, but well, training and experience, I know this can get a little complicated, but can you, on the allotment sheet, it talks about training and experience, we call it the T&E factor. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So the T&E, it also, I know we didn't mention that initially when talking about the different components of the allotment sheet. Just wanted to kind of keep it a simple overview, because I know you could really get into the weeds but T&E is factored into the allotment sheet, and basically that the state will fund a certified teacher. They provide the base funding, but then the T&E is wherever they're at on the pay scale. So if they're very highly many years, and also your education level. So if you receive master's degree, specialist, doctorate, wherever you fall on the state pay scale, the state will fund wherever that person is, and that's through T&E, training and experience. And T&E plays a role in when you're looking at budgets. I'll give an example of a budget scenario to where if you're really kind of struggling, if you have declining enrollment, which we have seen that, and we're experiencing that as well as many other districts. When you have teachers that are retiring, and they're retiring at the end of the school year. If you're able to replace them, you still have to look at, you still want to get the best candidate, but if you're able to replace them with a teacher that's coming in, or that's much doesn't have many years of experience, for that next year, you're still going to receive the T&E based on that retiree for 1 year. So if you have several instances of that, that could really help eliminate any potential future deficits.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, making the adjustment for that next year, with those lowers, but you're right. It's because it's in the rears, that's a good point. And speaking of that, so does the state fund T&E for every person that you employ, or only the ones that are on the allotment sheet?
It's only for the certified, that's on the allotment sheet. So if you have teachers, a lot of systems receive federal grants. So if you pay teachers out of a Title I grant or a special ed grant, those flow through grants, the state does not provide T&E for those teachers. If you have teachers above and beyond what is on your allotment sheet, they consider that to be locally funded as well. So you have to be careful to really look at the positions that you're earning on the allotment sheet, and kind of maintain your staffing level as close to that as you can.
Yeah. And have you ever seen a school system that could operate with only what you earn for assistant principals, assistant superintendent, teachers on the allotment sheet?
No, it's definitely that part is antiquated. And I pulled up some examples of actually what is funded. And for example, a superintendent, each system receives $64,744 for superintendent. For a secretary, which is considered an administrative assistant at a central office, the state only funds $14,449. So those are a couple examples of the weighted funding areas for those positions. So it definitely does not cover and fund those at all. And that's where you have to really budget for your what you can generate locally to adequately fund.
Yeah, and at the risk of going down a rabbit hole, but you brought up a very good point. For years we said fully fund QBE, and of course some of that was through the recession. Some of that was through COVID, talking about fully fund, because you would have they didn't call it austerity. Well, they used to call it austerity cuts. And then I think, what they change it to, amended formula adjustment?
Yes.
So, technically though, now, it would be an accurate statement that they fully fund QBE, the formula that is in place, they fully fund. But the thing that a lot of people don't understand is the rate at which those, as you pointed out, the rate at which those positions are funded kind of feel like 1980s when QBE came about, or somewhere 90s rates. Is that would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, that is very accurate. Also, I know we haven't discussed this, but the health insurance costs.
Yeah.
And I know that's a huge topic now at every district across the state. And a lot of systems are struggling trying to keep up with those costs. The state will cover the cost of health insurance for your earned certified positions. But a lot of times now that the rate is the same for all employees, you locally fund all of your classified or your non-certified positions, and a lot of times now that state health rate is as much as the salary is for a lot of your positions, such as custodial staff, your lunchroom staff, your school admin, the secretaries, the administrative assistants. So that is definitely an issue. But going back to kind of what you mentioned, austerity, and the state, then it kind of was an amended formula adjustment, but those did end with fiscal year 22. So since then, there has not been any austerity reductions, and the state, from the state level, they can accurately say that they are fully funding the QBE allotment sheets. But as we've discussed, and as you'll find, that's fully funding at those levels, which a lot of them are antiquated, and so that kind of is the primary driver when you'll hear of a legislator or an advocacy group, kind of say, hey, we need to look at QBE, and we need to change or update how QBE is funded. Typically, they're talking about those antiquated funding rates that's in QBE. But just to kind of give you an example, I know here at Bremen, we're considered a smaller school system enrollment-wise, but just since from 2009 to 2022, we had a total of over $10.4 million during that time span that was austerity or amended formula adjustment. That was funding above and beyond what the state gave us. So essentially, they withheld $10.4 million during that time span that we should have received as a system.
Yeah, and again, as you point out, being a somewhat smaller system, you can only imagine when you extrapolate that out, how much was cut. And so,
right.
I think pretty much. I do want to ask you one more, Mr. Pullen. This has been very informative. Thank you. If someone that's listening, they love the budget. Some folks don't, but someone that just loves the numbers, loves crunching the numbers. What would you encourage them to do if they aspire to be in a similar role to you one day in some capacity? Is there anything you would encourage or recommend that they do to educate themselves, learn more, so that when that job opportunity comes open, they can speak to these areas, with some confidence?
Sure. I would say to broaden your knowledge of kind of how you would want to look at the local tax component is an integral part. So you would want to look at how your property tax digest, your millage rate, how much you receive there. So you have that component. You have your funding component. So knowing those individual categories and FTEs and how students are coded, and knowing that funding sheet from a state level, you have that component. You also you want to be well versed in federal and state grants. That's kind of the third component there, and just knowing how those three things integrate with each other would help someone to be, that would put you on the step towards being a successful, finance person at a school district. Perfect. Well, thank you, Mr. Pullen. We definitely appreciate your time, and it was very informative. Thank you. I was glad to talk about school finance, and hopefully, a lot of times that gives people the scaries, but it really is a an integral part to funding and educating our students.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.